You did not stumble into this message by accident. Something in your spirit pulled you here, something ancient, something that has been stirring inside you for years. You have always felt different, not superior, not arrogant, different. Different in the way you see people, different in the way you feel atmospheres, different in the way certain conversations drain you while others awaken something deep inside your soul. And for a long time, you wondered if something was wrong with you. Why do you feel everything so deeply? Why do you notice tension in rooms that everyone else pretends is not there? Why do you sense sadness in people who are smiling? Why do family gatherings feel heavy even when everyone says everything is fine? Chosen one, understand this. You were never the problem. You were the censor. You were the one placed inside your bloodline to detect what others learn to ignore. Because every family carries history, generations of patterns, generations of wounds, generations of silence. And most bloodlines survive by pretending nothing is broken. They pass down pain the same way they pass down traditions, quietly, unspoken, unchallenged. But every so often, heaven inserts someone different into the lineage. Someone who cannot ignore what everyone else ignores. Someone who cannot pretend what everyone else pretends. Someone whose spirit reacts to the hidden sickness in the family system. That someone is you. You see, the world may call you too sensitive. Your family may have called you dramatic, emotional, overthinking. But what they called weakness was actually spiritual perception. You were designed to feel what others suppress. And if you have ever felt alone in that awareness, you are not the only one. There are others like you, scattered across families, across cities, across nations, chosen ones placed inside bloodlines like living repair codes, not to destroy their families, but to break the cycles that were quietly destroying them. That is why your life has felt different. That is why your journey has been heavier. Because when you are chosen to repair what generations ignored, your awareness activates before everyone else's. And today we are uncovering something most people will never understand. There are 9 reasons why you were placed inside your bloodline as a spiritual repair mechanism. 9 revelations that explain why your path has been so intense. 9 confirmations that your struggle was never random. If even one of these reasons resonates in your spirit, you will know this message was meant for you. And if you have been searching for answers about why your life unfolded the way it did, stay with this message until the end, because what you are about to understand will change how you see your past. And if this message speaks to your spirit, make your presence known. Subscribe, stand with others who carry the same calling. Because the chosen were never meant to walk completely alone. Now listen carefully. First, you were born with a sensitivity that the rest of your family could not understand. From the very beginning, something about you was different. You noticed things others dismissed. You felt emotional shifts that nobody else reacted to. You could walk into a room and immediately feel when something was wrong, even when everyone was smiling. As a child, you probably sensed tension long before adults admitted it existed. You could feel when arguments were coming. You could feel when someone was hiding pain. You could feel when something in the family dynamic was off. But when you tried to express it, people brushed it away. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. And slowly you started questioning your own perception. But chosen one, understand the deeper truth. Your sensitivity was never emotional fragility. It was spiritual detection. While others learned to numb themselves to the dysfunction around them, your spirit refused to go numb. You could feel the unspoken grief in your bloodline. You could feel the anger that was never resolved. You could feel the generational wounds that had been buried for decades. Most people adapt to broken systems. Chosen ones expose them, and that exposure makes people uncomfortable. Because when one person begins to see clearly, the illusion starts to crack. That is why your awareness often triggered resistance. Not because you were wrong, but because truth disrupts what darkness tries to hide. You were feeling the spiritual fractures inside your family long before anyone had language for them. You were sensing inherited pain that had never been processed. You were detecting patterns that had repeated for generations. Chosen one, your spirit was scanning the bloodline, not to condemn it, but to heal it. This is the first confirmation. Your sensitivity was not weakness. It was your diagnostic gift. The very thing that made you feel out of place is the very thing that qualifies you for your assignment. And what you sensed as a child was only the beginning. Because once awareness awakens, the real confrontation begins. Second reason, understand this. You became the questioner in a bloodline that survived by staying silent. Every family has rules that are never written down. Invisible laws, unspoken agreements. Don't talk about that. Leave the past alone. Respect the elders. Keep the peace. And for generations, everyone followed those rules. Not because they were healthy, not because they were true, but because silence kept the system stable. Silence kept the secrets buried. Silence kept the dysfunction hidden. Silence protected the illusion that everything was normal. But then you came along, and something inside you refused to accept what everyone else accepted. You started asking questions. Why does this pattern keep repeating? Why do people in this family carry so much hidden anger? Why does everyone pretend everything is fine when the atmosphere feels heavy? You noticed the contradictions, words that said one thing, energy that revealed another, and you could not ignore it. Chosen one, that restless feeling inside you was not rebellion. It was awakening. You were not trying to create conflict. You were trying to understand the truth. But in families that survive through silence, truth feels dangerous. The moment you start asking questions, people become uncomfortable. You saw it, the sudden tension, the defensive responses, the way conversations shut down the moment you touch something real. Have you ever noticed that the room goes quiet? Eyes shift away, someone changes the subject, because you touch something sacred to the old system. You touch the hidden wound. And here is what most people never realize. Generational dysfunction survives through agreement. Everyone agrees not to look too closely. Everyone agrees not to challenge certain behaviors. Everyone agrees to carry the pain quietly. But you broke the agreement. You asked the questions nobody wanted to ask. Why do we tolerate this behavior? Why do we repeat the same mistakes? Why does everyone protect the problem instead of healing it? And the moment you asked those questions, something shifted. Some people labeled you difficult. Some called you disrespectful. Some accused you of creating division. But chosen one, listen carefully. You were not creating division. You were exposing what was already divided. Truth does that. Light does that. When light enters a dark room, the darkness does not negotiate. It reacts. That is why questioning the system made you a target. Because the moment one person refuses to pretend, the entire structure starts trembling. And that is exactly what your presence was meant to do. You were not placed in your bloodline to maintain the old system. You were placed there to disrupt it, not through hatred, not through rebellion, through awareness, through truth, through courage. Your questions were not attacks. They were keys unlocking doors that had been sealed for generations. Doors hiding pain, doors hiding betrayal, doors hiding trauma that nobody had the strength to face until you. Chosen ones carry a different spirit, a spirit that refuses to cooperate with lies, even when it costs them comfort, even when it creates tension, even when it leads to isolation. Because deep inside you, there was always a quiet conviction. Something here needs to change, and if no one else will confront it, you will. That instinct did not come from ego, it came from assignment. You were the one designed to ask the questions that break generational chains. And if that role has made you feel like the outsider, understand something powerful. Every bloodline healer is first labeled the troublemaker, but history always reveals the truth. You were never the problem. You were the interruption. The interruption to cycles that had ruled your family for decades. And the moment questioning begins, the system can never fully return to sleep again, which leads directly to the next revelation. Third reason, understand what truly happened to you. You were pushed into isolation because your awareness threatened the old system. The moment you began to see clearly, resistance appeared, not from strangers, not from the outside world, from the very people you hoped would understand. Have you noticed that the moment your awareness sharpened, relationships shifted, conversations became tense, distance appeared where closeness once lived? People who once welcomed you suddenly felt uncomfortable around you. And for a while, you blamed yourself. You wondered if you had changed too much, if you had become too intense, too honest, too different. But chosen one look deeper. You did not suddenly become the problem. Your awareness became the disruption. When someone begins to wake up inside a system built on denial, the system reacts, always, because awareness threatens what silence protects. You began seeing patterns. You began noticing manipulation. You began recognizing emotional cycles that had quietly ruled the family for generations. And once you saw them, you could not unsee them. Your conversations changed. You started speaking truth, not with cruelty, not with arrogance, but with clarity. And clarity is dangerous to environments that depend on illusion. That is when the shift began. Some people withdrew. Some people labeled you difficult. Some people tried to convince you that you were imagining things. Why? Because your awakening destabilized the agreement everyone else had made. The agreement to pretend, the agreement to tolerate dysfunction, the agreement to protect the system at all costs. But your spirit refused to go back to sleep. And when one person refuses to sleep, the dream begins to break. That is why isolation entered your life. And listen carefully. This is where many chosen ones misunderstand their journey. You thought isolation was rejection. You thought you were being abandoned. But heaven was doing something far deeper. Isolation was protection. Protection from being pulled back into the old programming. Protection from being reshaped into the same patterns that trapped previous generations. Because environments shape identity, and if you had remained fully immersed in a system that resisted truth, the pressure to conform would have slowly worn down your awakening. So separation came, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully. But it came with purpose. Chosen ones are often removed before they are fully understood. Why? Because distance gives clarity. Distance breaks emotional entanglement. Distance allows you to see the entire system, not just the role you were assigned inside it. That is when something powerful begins to happen. When the noise fades, your inner voice becomes louder. When the chaos disappears, discernment sharpens. When the crowd steps back, destiny steps forward. Your isolation was not punishment, it was preparation. Preparation for someone who could no longer operate inside generational blindness. Preparation for someone who was being trained to rewrite the pattern, not repeat it. The world calls isolation loneliness. But in the spiritual realm, isolation is often initiation. An initiation into a higher level of awareness. An initiation into the role you were born to carry. Because once you step outside the system, you begin to see its architecture. You begin to see the wounds, the fears, the cycles that trapped your ancestors. And once you see it clearly, you can begin to break it. That is why your path separated. You were not being removed from your family. You were being repositioned above the pattern. Because a healer cannot repair a system while remaining trapped inside its illusion. And the moment awareness rises above the system, darkness begins to react, which leads to the next revelation. Fourth reason, understand this carefully. The darkness in your lineage began reacting specifically to you. At first it felt confusing. You started trying to grow, trying to heal, trying to live differently than the patterns you were raised around. And suddenly, resistance appeared. Strange resistance. Not the normal challenges everyone faces. No, this felt targeted. Every time you tried to rise, something pulled back. Every time you tried to change, conflict surfaced. Every time you began to step into clarity, chaos appeared around you. Have you noticed that pattern? You decide to break an unhealthy cycle, and suddenly tension erupts in the family. You begin setting boundaries, and people react with anger or guilt. You start healing emotionally, and old conflicts resurface out of nowhere. Chosen one, this is where the deeper truth begins to reveal itself. Generational dysfunction is not passive. It behaves like a system that protects itself, a system that resists change. For decades, sometimes centuries, certain emotional patterns lived inside your bloodline. Fear, control, addiction, suppressed anger, abandonment wounds, cycles of silence and denial. Those patterns became normalized. They became part of the family identity, part of the family culture, part of the family survival strategy. But the moment one person begins to break the chain, the system reacts. Why? Because your transformation threatens the survival of the pattern. Darkness always resists exposure. When light enters a room that has been dark for years, the darkness does not quietly leave. It fights, it pushes back, and chosen one. You became the light inside your lineage. That is why your journey has not been easy. The moment you began healing, the inherited shadows noticed. The moment you began awakening, the old energies surrounding your family system began to stir. That is when the warfare intensified. Some people misunderstand spiritual warfare. They think it only happens in dramatic moments, but often it appears as subtle sabotage, sudden discouragement, unexpected conflict, emotional manipulation, cycles trying to pull you back into old behaviors. Have you ever felt that? The strange pressure to return to who you used to be? The quiet voice saying, just stop trying so hard. Just go back to how things were. Just keep the peace. But something inside you refuses. Why? Because your spirit recognizes the assignment. You were not born into your bloodline to maintain its darkness. You were born to confront it. You were born to interrupt the pattern, and interruption always creates reaction. Think about it. When someone breaks a generational pattern of anger, the people who live inside that anger feel threatened. When someone refuses manipulation, manipulators lose their control. When someone begins healing trauma, the family system must face truths it avoided for decades. So the system reacts, not always consciously, not always intentionally, but the reaction still happens. And that reaction often lands directly on you. You become the target of frustration, the target of misunderstanding, the target of projection. But hear this clearly. You are not being attacked because you are weak. You are being resisted because you are effective. Your awareness destabilizes what darkness built over generations. Your growth exposes what the bloodline tried to normalize. Your courage forces buried pain to the surface. Chosen one, your life became the battleground because your transformation threatens the survival of inherited shadows. You are the disruption, you are the interruption, you are the crack in the generational wall, and once that crack appears, the wall will never be as strong as it once was. But the deeper revelation is still ahead, because confronting darkness in a bloodline does something unexpected to the chosen. It begins to change how pain flows through you, which leads to the next truth. Fifth reason, understand the power hidden inside this one. You carry an unusual capacity to absorb pain without becoming it. All your life you have felt things that were never fully yours, emotions that seemed too heavy, grief that appeared without explanation, anger that lingered in the air even when no one spoke about it. Have you noticed that you walk into certain family spaces and the atmosphere feels thick, heavy? You cannot always explain it, but your body feels it. Your spirit registers it. Other people ignore it, but you cannot. Chosen one, that sensitivity was never random. You were feeling unresolved pain stored inside the bloodline. Pain that previous generations buried. Pain they refused to process. Pain they learned to survive instead of heal. And when pain is buried, it does not disappear. It travels. It moves through the lineage. It hides inside behavior patterns, inside emotional reactions, inside generational habits nobody questions, until someone begins to feel it. That someone became you. Many chosen ones are placed inside their families as emotional processors, not to carry the pain forever, but to confront it, to face it, to transform it. You began feeling grief that had no clear source, moments of sadness that did not belong to your own story, waves of anger that seemed to echo something older, deeper. For a while, you may have wondered if something was wrong with you. Why do I feel so much? Why does everything affect me so deeply? Why do other people move through life untouched while I carry so much emotional weight? But listen carefully. Your capacity to feel deeply is not a flaw. It is a spiritual function. You were absorbing what others refused to acknowledge. You were sensing wounds that had been passed down silently. And here is where the true difference appears. Most people who absorb pain eventually become shaped by it. They become bitter. They become hardened. They become the next link in the same chain. But something unusual happened inside you. You refused to become the pain you carried. Yes, you felt it, but you did not multiply it. You did not pass it forward. Instead, something inside your spirit began transforming it, breaking it down, processing it, almost like a spiritual filtration system. You felt the grief, but you sought healing. You felt the anger, but you searched for understanding. You felt the trauma, but you refused to repeat the cycle. That ability is rare, extremely rare, because many people inherit pain. Few people transmute it, but that is exactly what your spirit began doing. You were not just surviving emotional weight, you were metabolizing it, taking inherited wounds and refusing to pass them into the next generation. Do you understand how powerful that is? Every moment you chose awareness over reaction, every moment you chose healing over repetition, every moment you stopped the cycle instead of continuing it, you were rewriting spiritual code inside the bloodline. That is why the weight sometimes felt overwhelming. You were not only carrying your story, you were confronting layers of generational emotion that had never been processed before. But chosen one, that weight is not a sign of weakness. It is proof of capacity, proof that your spirit was built to process what others could not, proof that your soul was strong enough to face inherited pain without becoming its prisoner. You were never meant to multiply the wounds of your bloodline. You were designed to neutralize them. And once someone learns to transform inherited pain, something even more powerful begins to unfold. Because patterns do not disappear quietly, they repeat again and again until someone finally stops them, which brings us to the next revelation. Sixth reason, understand the pattern that has followed you your entire life. Your life keeps presenting the same tests until the cycle finally breaks through you. You may have noticed it. Certain situations repeat, different people, different seasons, different circumstances, but the pattern feels familiar, almost identical. The same emotional conflicts, the same relational tensions, the same choices appearing again and again. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, why does this keep happening? Why do these same kinds of challenges keep returning? Why do I keep facing the exact struggles my parents talked about, or the same battles my grandparents lived through? Chosen one, that is not coincidence. That is the bloodline pattern surfacing. Generational cycles do not disappear just because time passes. They wait. They move quietly through the lineage until someone strong enough appears to confront them, until someone refuses to repeat them. And when that moment arrives, the cycle rises again, not to destroy you, but to be broken through you. Think about it. Your family may have struggled with anger, and suddenly you find yourself facing situations that provoke that same anger. Your lineage may have carried patterns of abandonment, and you encounter relationships that trigger that same wound. Maybe your bloodline struggled with addiction, betrayal, fear, or control, and somehow the same themes keep appearing in your life. Why? Because generational cycles seek continuation unless someone interrupts them, and that someone became you. But here is the critical difference between you and those who came before you. They experienced the cycle unconsciously. You see the pattern. They reacted automatically. You pause. They repeated the behavior. You question it. That awareness changes everything, because the moment you recognize the pattern, the chain begins to weaken. You start asking different questions. Why do I feel this reaction? Why does this situation feel familiar? Why do I feel pulled toward the same outcomes my family experienced? And that awareness is not accidental. It is spiritual positioning. You are being shown the cycle because you were assigned to end it. Chosen ones do not just inherit history, they confront it. They face the same tests their ancestors faced, but they face them with awareness. And awareness transforms the battlefield. Imagine standing at the exact point where generations before you fell. The same pressure, the same temptation, the same emotional trigger. But this time, the outcome changes. Because you saw it coming, because you recognized the trap, because you refused to respond the way the cycle demanded. That moment, that single decision, breaks something ancient, not just in your life, in the bloodline itself. When you refuse to repeat inherited behavior, the pattern loses its power. The chain weakens, the cycle fractures, and the spiritual script that controlled generations begins to rewrite. That is why the tests keep returning, not to punish you, to present the moment of interruption, to present the exact place where history changes. Chosen one, you are standing where your ancestors once stood, but you were given something they were not. Awareness, discernment, the courage to choose differently. And when you choose differently, the bloodline shifts. That is why your life carries such weight, because your decisions are not just personal, they are generational. But there is an even deeper layer to this awakening, because once you begin breaking patterns, your presence itself begins to affect the people around you, which leads to the next revelation. Seventh reason, understand the shift that began happening around you. Your presence itself began disrupting generational agreements. Not because you were trying to cause conflict, not because you were forcing confrontation, simply because you existed in the room. Have you ever noticed something strange? You walk into a family gathering and the atmosphere changes. Conversations pause. Certain topics suddenly disappear. Some people become uncomfortable. Others become defensive. And you did not even say anything yet. Chosen one, this is not imagination. This is spiritual exposure. Every family system survives through agreements, unspoken contracts, invisible rules that everyone follows whether they realize it or not. Rules like, we do not talk about that. We protect certain people no matter what. We pretend everything is fine. We keep the peace even if the truth is buried. These agreements create stability, but they also create silence. They hide wounds. They protect dysfunction. They bury the truth so deeply that entire generations grow up believing the illusion. Until someone enters the room who cannot hold the illusion anymore. That someone is you. Your spirit carries a different frequency, a different awareness, a different level of clarity. And when clarity enters a system built on denial, the system reacts, not because you attacked it, because your presence exposes it. Have you noticed how secrets begin surfacing around you? Stories people avoided for decades suddenly come out. Hidden tensions begin rising to the surface. Conversations that were once suppressed suddenly explode into the open, and people wonder why. They say, why is everything suddenly so tense? Why are old issues coming up now? But the truth is deeper. Your presence disturbed the silence. Your awareness disrupted the agreement. And once the agreement breaks, the buried pain begins to rise. Chosen one, your energy carries exposure. Darkness cannot stay comfortable around someone who sees clearly. Denial cannot survive in the presence of truth. That is why people sometimes react to you with unexpected intensity. Not because you attack them, but because something inside them knows they cannot hide around you. Your presence forces reality to surface. And reality is uncomfortable for systems built on avoidance. Some people will resent you for that. They will say you create tension. They will accuse you of stirring problems. But listen carefully. You are not creating the problem. You are revealing what was already there. Light does not create darkness, it reveals it. And revelation always causes reaction. That reaction is not proof that you are wrong. It is proof that your presence carries authority. Authority over silence, authority over deception, authority over generational denial. This is why chosen ones often feel like catalysts inside their families. The moment you appear, things start moving. Hidden wounds surface. Suppressed emotions rise. Truth pushes its way into the open. And once truth appears, it cannot be buried the same way again. That is the power of exposure. You did not come into your bloodline quietly. You came as a disruptor, a revealer, a breaker of generational agreements that protected dysfunction. And once those agreements start breaking, the bloodline begins shifting in ways people cannot fully explain. But the deeper impact of your presence goes even further. Because once truth enters the bloodline, healing begins rippling through places you cannot even see, which leads to the next revelation. Eighth reason, understand the ripple your life has already begun to create. Once you heal one pattern, the entire bloodline begins to shift, quietly, almost invisibly, but powerfully. Most people think healing is personal. They believe when they overcome something, it only affects their own life. But chosen one, that is not how spiritual inheritance works. Bloodlines are connected systems, generations linked together through behavior, memory, trauma, and spirit. What one generation tolerates, the next generation inherits. But what one generation breaks, the next generation no longer has to carry. And that is where your power becomes undeniable. Think about the moment you refused one inherited behavior. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was emotional manipulation. Maybe it was silence where truth should have lived. For decades, maybe even centuries, that pattern lived comfortably inside the family system. Everyone accepted it. Everyone normalized it. Everyone repeated it. But then something changed. You saw the pattern, you felt its weight, and you made a decision. No more. You stopped reacting the same way. You stopped feeding the same cycle. You stopped playing the role the system expected from you. That moment may have felt small. Maybe nobody even noticed. Maybe nobody applauded. But spiritually, something massive shifted. Because when one person in a bloodline refuses a pattern, the chain weakens. The energy feeding that cycle begins to collapse. Think of it like removing one critical link from an old chain. Suddenly, the structure cannot hold the same weight anymore, and the effect spreads further than you can see. Younger family members begin responding differently. Children begin sensing a different emotional environment. New possibilities open inside the lineage, not because everyone suddenly understood, but because someone finally interrupted the cycle. You, chosen one, you may never fully see the impact of what you are doing, but the bloodline feels it. Your refusal to repeat inherited wounds sends a signal forward in time, a signal that says, this pattern ends here. And when that signal is sent, future generations grow up in a different spiritual atmosphere. They may never know the battle you fought. They may never know the nights you wrestled with inherited pain, but they will benefit from the freedom you carved into the lineage. And here is the deeper mystery. This shift does not only move forward, it moves backward. Even the unresolved burdens of those who came before you begin to lose their grip. Generational trauma that haunted your ancestors begins to loosen its hold, because the cycle they were trapped inside has finally encountered resistance. Through you, chosen ones often underestimate the scale of their assignment. You think you are simply trying to heal your own life, but heaven positioned you inside the lineage for something much larger. Your healing is rewriting the spiritual script of the family. Your courage is changing the emotional inheritance of generations yet to be born. Your breakthrough is weakening chains that existed long before you arrived. That is why the pressure around your life has been so intense. You were never just living for yourself. You were carrying a generational turning point. And when a bloodline reaches a turning point, the forces resisting change become even more aggressive. Because the final stage of transformation is always the most dangerous. And that brings us to the most powerful revelation of all. Ninth reason, understand this with absolute clarity. Your assignment was never just personal healing. It is genetic-level spiritual reconstruction. You were not placed in your bloodline by accident. You were inserted, positioned, designed. Chosen ones are not simply born into families. They are planted inside them, like living repair codes placed inside a damaged system. Look at your life again. The sensitivity, the questioning, the isolation, the warfare, the emotional weight, the repeated tests. None of it was random. All of it was preparation. Because repairing a bloodline requires someone who can see the damage clearly without becoming the damage. And that is who you became. You see, every family carries spiritual instructions, invisible patterns that travel through generations, instructions about how to respond to conflict, instructions about how to handle pain, instructions about love, fear, anger, loyalty, silence. These instructions are not written in books. They are written in behavior. They are written in emotional patterns. They are written in the unseen code of the lineage. And for decades, sometimes centuries, those instructions repeat, parent to child, generation to generation, until someone arrives who carries a different code. You, chosen one. Your awareness is rewriting the script. Every decision you make sends a signal through the bloodline. When you choose truth instead of silence, the code changes. When you choose healing instead of bitterness, the code changes. When you choose courage instead of fear, the code changes. You are rewriting the instructions that future generations will inherit. Think about the magnitude of that. Your life is not just about survival. It is about reconstruction of emotional patterns, reconstruction of spiritual identity, reconstruction of a lineage that may have been wounded long before you were born. That is why the pressure on your life has been so intense. Darkness does not fight ordinary lives as hard. But when someone begins rewriting generational destiny, resistance rises. The enemy recognizes what you carry. The old patterns recognize what you threaten. But here is the truth they cannot stop. Once the repair code activates, the system cannot return to what it was. You are the interruption. You are the correction. You are the moment history changed inside your lineage. And whether your family understands it or not, the shift has already begun. Because chosen ones do not just heal themselves. They alter timelines. They break curses. They unlock futures that were once impossible. You are not simply living your life. You are rewriting a spiritual inheritance. And now you understand why your path has been different. Why the pressure felt heavier. Why the awakening came earlier. Why the isolation was necessary. You were being shaped for reconstruction. Now hear this clearly. You were never ordinary. You were never misplaced. You were chosen. Chosen to see what others ignored. Chosen to confront what others avoided. Chosen to break what others repeated. Chosen to rebuild what others believed could never change. And if this message resonates in your spirit, that recognition is not coincidence. It is confirmation. Because not everyone will understand this message. Only those who carry the assignment will feel it. So if you recognize yourself in these 9 reasons, declare it. Comment the number 9 below. Let it be your marker, your confirmation that you accept the role placed on your life. And if you are one of the chosen ones awakening to this truth, stand with others walking the same path. Subscribe to this channel. Stay connected to this message, because the world may never fully understand what you carry, but you are not walking this path alone. Remember this, you were not sent to fit into the system. You were sent to repair it. You were not sent to repeat the past. You were sent to rewrite it. You are chosen, and what was placed inside you cannot be stopped.